August 15, 1945. Atsugi Airfield, Japan. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai stood on the tarmac, watching American F4U Corsairs circle overhead, their distinctive inverted gull wings catching the morning light. The man who had survived 4 years of aerial combat, who had shot down 64 Allied aircraft, who had continued fighting with one eye destroyed by 50 caliber rounds, felt something he had never experienced during the entire war. Relief. The whistling death has stopped hunting us, he said to the young pilots gathered around him, their faces hollow from years of impossible odds. We can finally admit what we learned too late. They didn't just defeat us, they made us irrelevant. 3 years earlier, Japanese Navy pilots had dismissed early intelligence reports about a new American fighter with contempt. How could anything challenge the Mitsubishi A6M0, the fighter that had swept Allied air forces from Pacific skies in 6 months of seemingly effortless victories? The Zero turned tighter, climbed faster, and had defeated every opponent it encountered from Pearl Harbor to Ceylon to Port Moresby. What Japanese pilots discovered between 1943 and 1945 would shatter every assumption they carried about air combat, about American capabilities, and about their own chances of survival. The mathematics of their destruction were being written not in tactical manuals, but in the systematic annihilation of the world's most experienced fighter pilot corps by an aircraft they initially considered too heavy, too fast, and too brutish to threaten the refined art of Japanese aerial warfare. The transformation from confidence to terror began with a sound, a distinctive whistling scream that announced death descending from 30,000 feet at speeds Japanese fighters could never match. But the roots of this catastrophe lay 3 years earlier, when American naval aviators were dying in obsolete aircraft, while engineers worked frantically to create something that could survive against pilots who had been fighting since 1937. February 7, 1943. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Second Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, nephew of the legendary fighter race Junichi Sasai, who had been killed 6 months earlier, led his 4-aircraft division on a routine patrol over the contested island. Japanese intelligence had briefed Zero pilots about new American aircraft appearing in theater. Larger, heavier fighters that relied on speed rather than maneuverability. Sasai spotted them at 14,000 feet. 6 dark blue aircraft with bent wings climbing toward his formation. His radio crackled with excitement from his wingman. New American type. They climb like training aircraft. We will destroy them easily. What happened in the next 4 minutes would become a classified report that Japanese Naval Air Force headquarters initially refused to believe. Sasai's division, flying the finest fighter aircraft Japan had ever produced, piloted by men with an average of 800 combat hours, was systematically destroyed. 3 Zeros fell burning into the Pacific. Sasai survived only by executing a desperate split-S dive that exceeded the Zero's structural limits, damaging his aircraft so severely he barely reached Rabaul. The American aircraft that had done this were F4U-1 Corsairs from Marine Fighting Squadron 124, flown by pilots averaging 200 hours total flight time. They had not tried to turn with the Zeros. They had not needed to. The whistling death had arrived in the Pacific Theater. Between February 1943 and August 1945, F4U Corsair squadrons would achieve an aggregate kill ratio of approximately 11.1 against Japanese aircraft. In some squadrons, the ratio exceeded 20.1. More significantly, they would transform aerial warfare from an art emphasizing agility and pilot skill into an industrial process emphasizing speed, firepower, and coordinated tactics that Japanese pilots, for all their courage and experience, could not counter. This is the story of how American engineering and Japanese fighter pilots' own excellence created the conditions for systematic destruction, of how the most maneuverable fighter in the world became a liability when facing opponents who refused to fight on Japanese terms. and of how the sound of air rushing through oil cooler inlets at 400 miles per hour became synonymous with death for pilots who had once believed themselves invincible. The Zero's supremacy and the seeds of obsolescence. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, the Mitsubishi. A6M-0 fighters that escorted bombers to Pearl Harbor represented the apex of a design philosophy: achieve air superiority through superior maneuverability at any cost. The Zero could turn inside any Allied fighter. It could climb faster than anything America or Britain possessed. At low speeds, it was virtually unbeatable in dogfighting. These capabilities came from extreme weight reduction. The Zero's empty weight was just 680 kilograms, compared to 2,700 kilograms for a typical American fighter. This was achieved through minimal armor protection, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and airframe structures that were strong enough for normal combat loads, but fragile under extreme stress. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, flying Zeros since 1938, described the aircraft's capabilities in his combat diary from the Philippines campaign in December 1941. The Zero is like an extension of your body. You think turn left, and the aircraft responds instantly. American fighters are sluggish, heavy. They cannot follow our maneuvers. In turning combat, they are helpless. Their pilots bail out or die. We lose perhaps 1 Zero for every 10 Allied aircraft destroyed. This ratio will win the war. By mid-1942, Japanese Naval Air Force Zero pilots had accumulated hundreds of combat hours each, fighting in China, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and across the Pacific. They were the most experienced fighter pilot corps in the world. Their tactics, refined through years of combat, emphasized close-in turning engagements where the Zero's maneuverability guaranteed victory. American naval aviators flying F4F Wildcats paid a terrible price learning the Zero's capabilities. Lieutenant Commander John S. Thack, commanding Fighting Squadron 3, lost half his pilots in the first month at Guadalcanal. The Americans who survived did so by refusing to dogfight, instead using diving attacks and mutual support tactics, Thatch termed the Thatch Weave. But even the Thatch Weave was a defensive measure, a way to survive rather than dominate. What American forces needed was an aircraft that could beat Zeros without relying on pilot skill to compensate for inferior performance. Tseku, the Corsair, American Industrial Brutality, June 29, 1940. Chance Vought Aircraft Company, Stratford, Connecticut. Chief designer Rex Beisel received specifications from the U.S. Navy Bureau of Aeronautics that seemed impossible to satisfy. They wanted a carrier-based fighter with a top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour, powered by the most powerful engine available, the 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine. That engine requires a massive propeller to absorb its power. Beisel told his engineering team, "We need a 13-foot diameter propeller. How do we fit that on a carrier aircraft without making the landing gear absurdly tall?" The solution was radical, an inverted gull wing design that allowed shorter, stronger landing gear while providing ground clearance for the enormous propeller. What emerged was an aircraft that looked nothing like contemporary fighters. The Corsair was massive for a single-engine fighter, weighing 4,074 kilograms empty, more than twice the Zero's weight. The F4U prototype first flew on May 29, 1940, and immediately demonstrated extraordinary performance. On October 1, 1940, test pilot Lyman A. Bullard achieved 405 miles per hour in level flight, making the Corsair the first American fighter to exceed 400 maximum at a race. But carrier qualification trials in 1941-1942 revealed serious problems. The Corsair's long nose blocked forward visibility during carrier approaches. The aircraft bounced dangerously on carrier decks. Landing characteristics were vicious, with a tendency to stall suddenly and drop a wing. The U.S. Navy initially rejected the Corsair for carrier operations, relegating it to Marine Corps land-based squadrons. This rejection proved fortunate. Marine squadrons deploying to Guadalcanal and other forward airfields needed fighters that could dominate the aerial battlefield. Not aircraft that could safely land on carriers, the Corsair was perfect for this role. First Lieutenant Kenneth A. Walsh, assigned to Marine Fighting Squadron 124, first flew the Corsair in January 1943. His initial impressions, recorded in his flight log, captured the aircraft's character. This is not a fighter in the traditional sense. It's a high-speed weapons platform. You don't turn and burn in a Corsair. You plan. Your attack, dive to build energy, kill your target with 650 caliber machine guns, then extend away at speeds the enemy cannot match. It requires a different mindset. Forget everything you learned about dogfighting. This is industrial warfare. You're not a knight in single combat. You're a factory worker delivering death efficiently. Third, the sound of death. The Corsair's distinctive whistle, which gave it the Japanese nickname whistling death, resulted from air being forced through the engine's oil cooler intakes at high speed. At cruising speeds, the sound was barely noticeable. At combat speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour, the whistle became a penetrating scream audible over engine noise. Petty Officer First Class Toshiyuki Sueda, flying Zeros from Rabaul, first encountered Corsairs on March 14, 1943. His after-action report, discovered in Japanese Naval Air Force archives after the war, described the psychological impact. We were patrolling at 15,000 feet when my wingman reported enemy aircraft above us. Before we could identify them, we heard the whistling sound, high-pitched, growing louder. 4 dark shapes dove through our formation at incredible speed. One Zero exploded immediately. Another spun into the sea burning. The Americans extended away before we could react. They climbed back to altitude. The whistling sound returned. Another diving attack. Another Zero destroyed. They repeated this 4 times. We could not catch them. We could not evade them. The whistling sound announced each attack seconds before the machine guns opened fire. By the end of the engagement, that sound meant death. We lost 6 Zeros. The Americans lost nothing. This is not air combat as we know it. This is execution. Japanese pilots quickly learned to fear the whistle. Unlike other American fighters whose approach could be detected visually, the Corsair announced its diving attacks orally. The psychological effect was devastating. Even experienced pilots reported hesitation and fear when hearing the distinctive sound. Lieutenant Junior Grade Yasuhiro Shigematsu, commanding a fighter division at Rabaul, reported to his superiors in April 1943 about declining morale. Our pilots are affected by the new American fighter. They call it the whistling death. Some pilots have requested transfer to other duties. These are not cowards. These are experienced combat pilots who understand we cannot defeat this aircraft using our current tactics. The Americans dive from above at speeds we cannot match. They fire from ranges where our return fire is ineffective. They extend away before we can counterattack. Our advantage in maneuverability is irrelevant because they refuse to turn with us. How do we fight an enemy that will not engage in traditional combat? This question haunted Japanese fighter tactics throughout 1943 and 1944. The answer ultimately was that they couldn't. Mafarku. The firepower revolution. The Corsair mounted 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing. Total ammunition load was 2,400 rounds. Combined rate of fire was 4,800 rounds per minute. Convergence was typically set at 300 yards, creating a cone of fire that could shred aircraft structures in seconds. More significant than the number of guns was the ammunition itself. American 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds could penetrate armor plate, ignite fuel, and destroy aircraft structures with equal efficiency. The rounds used a delayed action fuse that ensured penetration before detonation. Japanese aircraft, designed for weight reduction, were catastrophically vulnerable to this firepower. The Zero's fuel tanks, while protected by carbon dioxide fire suppression systems, were not self-sealing. A single .50 caliber incendiary round could ignite fuel that then burned uncontrollably. The Zero's minimal armor provided no protection against rounds designed to penetrate steel plate. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, commanding Marine Fighting Squadron 214, the Black Sheep Squadron, described the devastating effectiveness of Corsair firepower in a January 1944 interview with military reporters. "You don't need to be a great shot in a Corsair. The 650s throw so much lead that if you get anywhere close, you're going to hit. I've seen Zeros literally disintegrate under fire. 2-second burst, the target comes apart. Wings separate, fuselage breaks in half, or it just explodes. The Japanese built beautiful aircraft optimized for maneuverability. We built aircraft optimized for killing. In a guns-only fight, killing beats maneuvering every time." Boyington achieved 28 confirmed aerial victories flying the Corsair, making him one of the war's leading aces. His tactics emphasized using the Corsair's speed to dictate engagement terms and its firepower to ensure kills with minimal exposure time. First Lieutenant Robert M. Hansen, serving with Marine Fighting Squadron 215, demonstrated the Corsair's lethality during a 3-week period in February 1944. Between January 14th and February 3rd, Hansen shot down 20 Japanese aircraft, including 11 in 4 days. His gun camera footage, preserved in Marine Corps archives, showed typical engagement times of 2 to 4 seconds from first rounds fired to target destruction. Hansen described his tactics in a letter to his family dated February 2nd, 1944, one day before he was killed in action. "The Corsair makes aerial combat simple. Stay high, stay fast, pick your target, dive, fire, extend, climb back to altitude, repeat. The Japanese try to turn with us. We ignore them and maintain our energy. They become frustrated and make mistakes. We exploit those mistakes with overwhelming firepower. I have personally shot down 15 enemy aircraft in the past 2 weeks. I'm not a better pilot than they are. I have a better aircraft and use it properly. That is the difference between living and dying." The tactical revolution. Boom and zoom. The Corsair's performance characteristics made traditional dogfighting unnecessary and dangerous. The aircraft's roll rate was slow by Zero standards. Turn performance, while good for such a large aircraft, could not match the Zero's ability to sustain 6G turns indefinitely. Marine Corps and Navy fighter tactics evolved to exploit the Corsair's advantages: superior speed, superior rate of climb, superior diving speed, and overwhelming firepower. This tactical philosophy became known as boom and zoom. Major Marion Carl, one of the first Marine Corps aces in Corsairs, established the tactical doctrine that would dominate Pacific air combat from 1943 onward. His training manual for VMF 223, written in March 1943, laid out the principles. Never turn with a zero, never slow down to engage unless you have altitude advantage and energy to extend away. Never dogfight. Your mission is to kill enemy aircraft while surviving. The Corsair accomplishes this through speed and firepower, not maneuverability. Maintain altitude advantage. Dive through enemy formations. Fire. Continue diving to build speed. Extend away at full throttle. Climb back to altitude. Repeat. The enemy cannot follow your dive. They cannot catch you in extension. They cannot reach you at altitude. You control every engagement. Use that control to achieve kills without losses. This doctrine required discipline that traditional fighter-pilot culture resisted. Pilots trained to think of aerial combat as individual contests found it counterintuitive to refuse battle when the enemy was in front of them. Second Lieutenant Archie Donahue, assigned to VMF 112, described the psychological adjustment required in a June 1943 letter. Everything we learned in flight training emphasized dog-fighting skills, turn performance, slow-speed handling, aerobatics. The Corsair renders all of that irrelevant. We don't turn, we don't fight slow, we don't dog-fight. Instead, we dive on targets at 400 miles per hour, kill them in 2 seconds, then zoom away faster than they can follow. It feels like cheating. It feels unsportsmanlike. It feels like the only way to survive against pilots with 1,000 combat hours each. I watched a Zero pilot try to chase one of our guys in an extension climb. The Zero stalled out at 8,000 feet. Our Corsair was at 15,000 and still climbing. The Zero fell spinning. We shot him during the recovery. That's the war now. Speed kills. Maneuverability doesn't matter anymore. 6. Japanese desperation. Adaptation attempts. Japanese Naval Air Force leadership recognized the Corsair threat by mid-1943. Intelligence reports analyzed captured Corsairs, pilot interrogations, and gun camera footage to understand American tactics. The conclusions were grim. Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's leading tactical theorists and architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, wrote an assessment for Combined Fleet Headquarters in July 1943 that was classified until after the war. The American F4U fighter represents a fundamental shift in aerial warfare philosophy. While we have optimized for maneuverability at low speeds, the Americans have optimized for speed at all speeds and overwhelming firepower. Their tactics exploit this advantage completely. They will not dogfight. They engage only when conditions favor them. They accept no risks. This combination of aircraft performance and tactical discipline makes them nearly impossible to defeat using our current methods. We must develop countermeasures or accept unsustainable attrition rates. Genda recommended 3 responses. Develop higher performance fighters to match American speed, improve pilot training and deflection shooting to hit diving targets, and develop tactics specifically designed to force Americans into low-speed turning fights. All 3 initiatives failed. Japan's aircraft industry, strained by material shortages and Allied bombing, could not produce fighters matching Corsair performance in sufficient quantities. The A6M50 variant introduced improved roll rate and diving speed, but still could not match the Corsair. The J-2M Raiden Interceptor and the N-1KJ Shiden fighter showed promise but arrived too late and in too few numbers. Pilot training deteriorated catastrophically as experienced instructors died in combat. By 1944, Japanese replacement pilots arrived at operational units with as little as 100 total flight hours, compared to 300-plus hours for American pilots. These inexperienced pilots stood no chance against Corsair tactics. Petty Officer, 2nd Class, Takeo Tanimizu, arriving at Rabaul in September 1943 with minimal training, recorded his experiences in a diary discovered after the war. I completed flight training with 120 hours total. My instructors told us we must make up for inadequate training with spirit and aggression. My first combat sortie occurred on September 21st. We encountered 12 American fighters at 20,000 feet. Our division leader ordered us to attack. The Americans dove away before we could engage. We pursued. They extended at speeds we could not match. Then they climbed back to altitude and dove on us from behind. 4 of our 8 aircraft were destroyed in less than 3 minutes. I survived because an experienced pilot, Warrant Officer Nakamura, ordered me to dive for the sea at full throttle when the Americans reversed. The Corsairs did not follow us below 5,000 feet. Nakamura explained that the Americans will not risk low-altitude combat, where a single hit might force them into the sea. He said our only chance against them is to force them low, force them slow, and hope they make mistakes. He said this almost never works. He was killed 2 days later when Corsairs dove through our formation over Bougainville. I think about his words constantly. We cannot win. We can only die bravely. Corsair, the kill ratio, mathematics of annihilation. Marine Corps and Navy Corsair squadrons achieved kill ratios that exceeded anything in aerial warfare history. Marine Fighting Squadron 214, Pappy Boyington's Black Sheep Squadron, achieved 97 confirmed victories against 3 combat losses in 84 days of operations. Marine Fighting Squadron 215 achieved 137 victories against 4 combat losses. Navy Fighting Squadron 17 achieved 154 victories against 4 combat losses. These ratios reflected not individual pilot superiority, but systematic advantages. Better aircraft performance, better tactics, better training, better logistics, and by 1944, overwhelming numerical superiority. Japanese fighter units watched their strength evaporate. The carrier air groups that had struck Pearl Harbor with over 400 aircraft and nearly 400 highly trained pilots had been systematically destroyed by late 1943. Replacements arrived with inadequate training and minimal combat experience. They died at rates that made survival beyond 3 months unlikely. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima, operations officer for the 253rd Naval Air Group at Rabaul, maintained detailed records of unit strength and combat effectiveness through 1943 to 1944. His records, captured when American forces occupied Rabaul in 1945, documented the collapse of Japanese fighter capability. In February 1943, the 253rd Air Group deployed to Rabaul with 48 Zeros and 48 pilots, averaging 600 combat hours each. By August 1943, the unit had received 96 replacement aircraft and 87 replacement pilots. Only 14 of the original February pilots survived. The August strength was 32 operational aircraft and 45 pilots, most with minimal experience. Nakajima's November 1943 report to headquarters described the situation. We cannot maintain combat effectiveness at current loss rates. Experienced pilots are irreplaceable. Replacement pilots lack training for the combat environment they face. American Corsair and Hellcat fighters destroy our formations systematically. Our pilots, however brave, cannot compensate for inferior aircraft and inadequate training. We are achieving approximately 1 victory for every 5 Japanese aircraft lost. This ratio is unsustainable. Without reinforcement by experienced pilots and competitive aircraft, this unit will cease to exist as an effective fighting force within 3 months. The 253rd Air Group was withdrawn from combat in January 1944, with fewer than 20 operational aircraft and 15 pilots. Similar statistics characterized nearly every Japanese fighter unit in the Pacific by mid-1944. Tsitataiyun. The personal testimony, terror from above. Warrant Officer Katsuo Takahashi survived longer than most Japanese fighter pilots in the Solomons campaign. He arrived at Rabaul in April 1943 and flew combat missions until January 1944, when he was evacuated to Japan, suffering from exhaustion and malnutrition. In post-war interviews conducted by American historians in 1952, Takahashi described the psychological impact of facing Corsairs daily for 9 months. The first time you hear the whistle, you think it is anti-aircraft fire or diving aircraft far away. Then you realize the sound is diving Corsairs about to fire on your formation. You have perhaps 3 seconds to react. Experienced pilots immediately dive for altitude separation or execute hard turns to spoil the American aim. But the Corsairs are so fast that even immediate reaction is often inadequate. I watched dozens of pilots die in the first burst of fire before they could maneuver. The ones who survived the first attack then faced the problem of what to do next. The Corsairs have extended away at speeds we cannot match. We cannot catch them. We wait for them to climb back to altitude and attack again. This sometimes repeats 4 or 5 times in a single engagement. We lose 2 or 3 aircraft each attack. The Americans lose nothing. Eventually, our formation is so depleted, we must break off and return to base. The psychological effect is devastating. You know when you take off that you will face aircraft you cannot defeat. You know experienced pilots are dying. You know replacement pilots last perhaps 3 or 4 missions before they die. You continue flying because duty requires it, but you know you will die. It is only a question of when. Takahashi's description captured the essential asymmetry of Corsair combat. Japanese pilots flew knowing they faced opponents with systemic advantages they could not overcome through courage or skill. This knowledge degraded morale and combat effectiveness more than any tactical defeat. Chief Warrant Officer Saburo Sakai, the legendary ace who survived the entire war, provided additional perspective in his memoir published in 1957. The Corsair represented everything wrong with our strategic situation by 1943. The Americans could produce these aircraft by the thousands. They could train adequate pilots quickly. They could deploy them everywhere simultaneously. We could produce zeros in limited numbers. We could not train pilots fast enough to replace losses. We could not match American resources. The Corsair proved this every day. It was not just a superior aircraft. It was evidence of industrial capacity we could never match. Every time Corsairs appeared over our airfields, they reminded us we were fighting the world's largest industrial economy, and we would lose. This was more demoralizing than the combat itself. The Corsairs killed us physically. The knowledge that America could produce unlimited Corsairs killed us psychologically. The carrier deployment, expanding the killing ground. While the U.S. Navy initially rejected the Corsair for carrier operations, combat necessity forced reconsideration. By late 1944, with kamikaze attacks threatening the fleet and Japanese air opposition intensifying, the Navy needed every effective fighter available. Modifications improved carrier landing characteristics. British Royal Navy pilots flying Corsairs from carriers since April 1944 developed techniques for managing the difficult approach. American carrier pilots adopted these methods by early 1945. Navy Fighting Squadron 17, deploying aboard USS Hornet in January 1945, brought Corsair capabilities directly to the Japanese homeland. The squadron's combat record from January through August 1945 demonstrated the Corsair's dominance even against desperate Japanese defense. 154 aerial victories, 4 combat losses. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, commanding a division in VF-17, developed the mowing machine tactical formation that maximized Corsair advantages while providing mutual support. His division achieved 50 confirmed victories without loss between February and May 1945. Valencia described his tactics in a May 1945 interview with Naval Aviation News. We operate as a coordinated team, 4 Corsairs in spread formation with assigned sectors of responsibility. When we encounter enemy aircraft, we don't engage individually. We maintain formation integrity and attack in coordinated passes. One element dives and attacks. The other element remains high for top cover. After the attack, roles reverse. The Japanese cannot isolate individual aircraft from our formation. They cannot engage one element without exposing themselves to the other. We maintain energy advantage throughout the engagement. This allows us to control the battle completely. We decide when to engage, when to extend, when to re-engage. The enemy has no options except to run or die. Most choose to fight and die. Some try to run and die anyway. We achieved 50 kills as a division. We lost no pilots. That's not because we're better pilots than the Japanese. It's because we have better aircraft, better tactics, and better mutual support. By mid-1945, Corsairs operated from carriers throughout the Pacific, attacking Japanese airfields, supporting amphibious operations, and intercepting kamikaze attacks. The aircraft that had begun the war as a rejected carrier fighter had become the most effective carrier-based fighter in the Pacific theater. X. The kamikaze threat. Corsairs as last defense. The emergence of organized kamikaze tactics in October 1944 created a new challenge requiring different fighter capabilities. Kamikaze aircraft, often obsolete types flown by minimally trained pilots, did not engage in combat. They attempted to crash into American ships regardless of defending fighters. Stopping kamikazes required fighters that could intercept them at long range, destroy them with certainty, and do so repeatedly as waves of attacks continued. The Corsair proved ideal for this mission. The Corsair's high top speed allowed it to catch even fast Japanese aircraft attempting to penetrate fleet defenses. Its rate of climb enabled rapid response to radar contacts. Its firepower ensured target destruction even in brief firing passes. Its range allowed it to patrol a distance from the fleet, engaging attackers before they reached the ships. Lieutenant James Sweat, flying Corsairs from USS Bunker Hill during the Okinawa campaign, described anti-kamikaze operations in April 1945. "We patrol at maximum range from the fleet, following vectors from fighter directors aboard the radar picket destroyers. When they detect incoming raids, they direct us to intercept courses. We meet the Japanese 50 or 60 miles from the fleet. Most kamikaze pilots have minimal training. They fly straight and level toward their targets. We attack from behind and above, diving to build overtake speed. 650s shred their aircraft in seconds. The challenge is that there are so many of them." On April 16th, my division intercepted over 30 aircraft in multiple waves. We destroyed 11 confirmed. Others broke through to attack the fleet. We landed, rearmed, refueled, and went back out. 3 sorties that day, 20 kills in our squadron. It still wasn't enough. The kamikazes damaged several ships. This is industrial warfare. We kill as many as we can, as fast as we can. The Japanese send more than we can kill. Some get through. Ships burn. People die. We go up again. Corsair squadrons during the Okinawa campaign flew thousands of combat air patrol sorties, achieving hundreds of victories against kamikaze aircraft. Despite this, over 300 kamikaze hits damaged or sank American ships, demonstrating that even overwhelming fighter superiority could not prevent all attacks when the enemy accepted 100% losses. So, the technological arms race, too little, too late. Japanese aircraft designers recognized by 1943 that the Zeros era had ended. New fighters entering development aimed to match American performance. The Kawanishi N1KJ Shiden, the Mitsubishi J2M Raiden, and the improved A7M Reppu represented attempts to field fighters competitive with the Corsair. These aircraft showed promise in testing. The N1KJ George achieved competitive speed and featured heavy armament. Test pilots reported it could match or exceed the Corsair in certain performance parameters. But development delays, production difficulties, material shortages, and pilot training deficiencies meant these aircraft arrived too late and in too few numbers to affect the war's outcome. Lieutenant Junior Grade Naoshi Kano, one of Japan's leading aces, flew the N1KJ Shiden in combat during 1945. His assessment, recorded in his final letter home before his death in August 1945, captured the futility. The Shiden is a worthy opponent for the Corsair. It has speed, it has firepower, it has strength. In the hands of an experienced pilot, it can fight American aircraft on equal terms, but I am one of perhaps 50 pilots in the entire Navy with sufficient experience to exploit its capabilities. The Americans have thousands of competent pilots in superior aircraft. The Shiden arrived 2 years too late. If we had possessed this aircraft in 1943 with the pilots we had then, the air war might have been different. Now, in 1945, with inexperienced pilots, inadequate fuel, and overwhelming American numerical superiority, even the Shiden cannot change our fate. I will continue fighting because duty requires it, but I know Japan has already lost. Kano died on August 1, 1945, shot down by Corsairs near Tokyo Bay. His Shiden was one of the few to actually reach operational squadrons before the war ended. Sefer, The final accounting. Victory through industrial superiority. Vought produced 12,571 F4U Corsairs between 1942 and 1952, with 7,129 completed during World War II. Other manufacturers, including Goodyear and Brewster, produced additional examples under license. The Corsair served with the U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps, Royal Navy, and Royal New Zealand Air Force during the war. Corsair pilots achieved approximately 2,040 aerial victories against Japanese aircraft between February 1943 and August 1945. Losses to Japanese aircraft totaled approximately 189 Corsairs. The aggregate kill ratio across all Corsair operations was approximately 11.3.1. Individual squadrons exceeded even these impressive ratios. Marine Fighting Squadron 214 achieved 24.1. Marine Fighting Squadron 323 achieved 19.1. Navy Fighting Squadron 17 achieved 38.1. These statistics reflected systematic advantages at every level. American industrial capacity produced aircraft faster than they could be destroyed. American training programs produced competent pilots faster than they could be killed. American logistics ensured continuous operations with minimal downtime for maintenance or supply shortages. Japan's situation was the opposite. Aircraft production decreased throughout 1944 and 1945 due to material shortages and bombing. Pilot training degraded catastrophically as experienced instructors died and fuel became scarce. Logistics collapsed as shipping lanes were cut and bases isolated. The Corsair contributed to this collapse not just through aerial victories, but through the systematic destruction of Japanese air power. Every experienced pilot killed in combat represented irreplaceable capability. Every aircraft destroyed meant scarce resources wasted. Every tactical defeat reinforced Japanese understanding that they could not win. August 15, 1945. Atsugi Airfield, Japan. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai watched the American Corsairs circle overhead. Their mission changed from killing to peacekeeping in an instant when Emperor Hirohito announced surrender. Around him stood the remnants of Japanese Naval Air Force fighter units assembled to receive surrender instructions. Fewer than 200 pilots remained from air groups that had begun the war with thousands. Most were young, inexperienced, many having never scored a victory. The veterans like Sakai could be counted on one hand. "We were not defeated by superior courage," Sakai said to the assembled pilots. His words preserved in the diary of Ensign Yasuo Kuwahara, one of the youngest pilots present. "We were not defeated by superior skill. We were defeated by superior resources, superior tactics, and superior thinking about what air combat would become." The Corsair proved that maneuverability no longer mattered when speed and firepower could be combined with disciplined tactics. "We continued flying aircraft designed for the last war while fighting aircraft designed for this one." Sakai gestured toward the circling Corsairs. "That sound that terrorized you, that whistling that announced death, has stopped. The Americans no longer hunt us. But remember this. They hunted us with efficiency we could not match, using weapons we could not counter, supported by industry we could not compete with. The Corsair was merely the tool. The real weapon was American industrial capacity and willingness to develop tactics that maximized their advantages." The Corsair's legacy extended beyond impressive statistics or tactical dominance. It represented a fundamental shift in aerial warfare philosophy that would define jet-age combat: speed and energy management over maneuverability, firepower over agility, systematic tactics over individual skill. The Japanese Zero pilots who faced Corsairs learned lessons they could not apply because learning came too late and at costs they could not sustain. The most experienced fighter pilot corps ever assembled was systematically destroyed, not because they lacked courage or skill, but because courage and skill could not overcome industrial capacity married to tactical innovation. Post-war interrogations of surviving Japanese pilots revealed consistent themes. respect for the Corsair's capabilities, bitterness toward Japanese leadership that sent inadequately trained pilots to face overwhelming odds. Recognition that the war was lost when American industrial capacity combined with tactical discipline created conditions where Japanese pilot skill became irrelevant. Warrant Officer Katsuo Takahashi, interviewed in 1952, provided the assessment that captured his generation's understanding. The Corsair did not defeat us through superior pilots or superior aircraft alone. It defeated us through superior system integration. American industry produced the aircraft. American training produced competent pilots. American logistics kept them supplied and maintained. American tactics exploited the aircraft's advantages while minimizing its weaknesses. American commanders accepted that technological superiority made traditional dogfighting obsolete. This integration created capability we could not match regardless of our individual pilot quality. We learned this through systematic destruction of our air forces. The whistle announced each lesson. By the time we understood the lesson completely, we had no pilots left who could apply the knowledge. That is how we lost the air war. The statistics support this assessment. Japan began the war with approximately 3,500 trained naval aviators, the finest in the world. By August 1945, fewer than 300 survived. American training programs graduated over 60,000 naval aviators during the war. Losses were replaced continuously. Japanese losses could not be replaced adequately. The Corsair flew from 1943 until the Korean War ended in 1953, achieving additional aerial victories against North Korean aircraft and providing close air support throughout that conflict. It remained in service with some militaries until the 1960s, making it one of the longest-serving combat aircraft ever built. But its most significant achievement occurred between February 1943 and August 1945 in the Pacific Theater, where it systematically destroyed the Japanese Naval Air Force's fighter capability through superior performance, superior tactics, and superior systematic integration of technology, training, and logistics. The Zero pilots who survived to see Corsairs circle overhead on August 15, 1945, understood completely what they had faced. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's final assessment, recorded in his memoir years later, captured this understanding perfectly. American pilots told me after the war that they respected the Zero and feared Japanese pilots' skill. They were being polite. By 1943, they didn't need to fear us. They had aircraft that made our skill irrelevant. They had tactics that made our maneuverability useless. They had numbers that made our sacrifice meaningless. The Corsair whistled as it dove. That whistle was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. You're about to die, and there is nothing you can do to prevent it. That was the truth of the Pacific Air War from 1943 onward. The Corsairs came. We died. More Corsairs came. We died. The cycle continued until we could send no more pilots to die. That is why we called it Whistling Death. The name was exact. The whistle announced death. Death always followed, and there was nothing we could do except die bravely and hope the war would end before every Japanese pilot was killed. The war ended on August 15, 1945. The whistling stopped, but the lessons remained, carved not in stone monuments, but in the empty chairs at Japanese air bases, in the thousands of graves marked and unmarked across the Pacific, in the statistics showing 11.1 kill ratios that proved industrial warfare's ultimate truth. Adequate weapons, produced in overwhelming numbers, wielded by competently trained soldiers, supported by sustainable logistics, and employed using sound tactics, will defeat superior weapons every time. The Japanese Zero pilots called the F4U Corsair Whistling Death. They were right. The whistle announced death. The Corsair delivered it with systematic efficiency that characterized American industrial warfare. And the Zero pilots, for all their courage, skill, and sacrifice could not prevent what the whistle promised. From February 1943, when First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh scored VMF 124's first Corsair kill, to August 15, 1945, when the last combat operations ceased, the F4U Corsair achieved what it was designed to do: establish air superiority through superior speed, superior firepower, and superior tactical employment that made Japanese fighter pilots' skill irrelevant. The 0 pilots who survived to surrender knew this completely. The thousands who died hearing that distinctive whistle in their final seconds knew it too, and history records it as fact. When the whistle announced death, death followed, 11 times for every Corsair lost, thousands of times across 3 years of Pacific combat, until Japanese Naval Air Force fighter capability was destroyed utterly. That is why Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai felt relief watching Corsairs circle overhead on August 15, 1945. The whistling had stopped hunting him. After 4 years of surviving against impossible odds, the finest fighter pilot of his generation could finally admit what Japanese pilots had learned through blood and terror. When industrial capacity combines with tactical innovation and systematic execution, courage and skill become insufficient. The Corsair proved this truth every time it dove, every time the whistle screamed through the Pacific air, every time 650 caliber machine guns delivered 800 rounds per minute into aircraft designed for an obsolete style of warfare. Whistling death. The name was earned. The name was accurate. The name was all that needed to be said.